Hello, welcome to our inaugural episode of Pravcast History. I'm your host, Michael Pravia, and I would like to welcome you to our topic of the day, which is the Mexican-American War. In the past, I've traditionally done mini documentaries or video essays, but I'd like to give this podcast format a try, so let me know what you guys think of this in the comments down below. So, the Mexican American War is really fueled by the concept of manifest destiny, a semi religious belief that it was the fate of the United States, as well as kind of the duty of the United States, to spread American civilization, political government, types of economy, as well as culture from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And then you'll see later on that they go past the Pacific into places like Hawaii and the Philippines. So this was really the most successful war of manifest destiny in order to expand American territory in the American Southwest and states like Arizona, New Mexico, and that region today. So as the United States is expanding, you have free states, slave states, different types of political economy, different types of visions for the future, balance of federalism between state and federal power, as well as moral and religious issues that are going to be ignited as the new territory gained at the end of the Mexican American War creates a conflict and a competition between the North and the South, free and slave states, to control the functions of the federal government and really the nature of the political union of the United States. So in the 1840s, we have the presidency of John Tyler. John Tyler is an interesting character because he was nominated on a Whig platform under the leadership of William Henry Harrison, and of course William Henry Harrison died early in office, and John Tyler was a bit of a Jeffersonian states' rights, strict constitutionalist, and he was kicked out of his own party because he was vetoing legislation, Henry Clay's American system of a national bank, internal improvements, as well as tariffs in order to try to kickstart the American economy because he believed that those violated states' rights and were not explicitly stated in the Constitution. And for this, he was actually kicked out of his own party. The Whig Party, under the leadership of Henry Clay, actually kicked him out. So he was a president without a party, and they referred to him humorously as his accidency to undermine the legitimacy of his presidency. So him being without a party is going to lead to him not seeking re-election in 1844. And towards the end of his term, you have the annexation of Texas. And Texas was its own independent republic and fought its own war of independence against Mexico and had tried to enter the Union previously, but because it was going to bring another slave state into the Union, the free states had fought its joining the Union and its annexation. But towards the end of John Tyler's administration, we actually have Texas joining the Union, which is going to help ignite conflict with Mexico. Another thing that's happening in the 1844 election is we have the rise of a prominent figure named James K. Polk, also known as Young Hickory. Of course, Old Hickory being Andrew Jackson, and James K. Polk was very much Andrew Jackson's protege. And James K. Polk will win the 1844 election on a platform of national expansion. And James K. Polk presided over more territorial acquisition than any other president in American history and only served one term, having conquered the American Southwest from Mexico, as well as settling with the British to get the area of Oregon and Washington in the Pacific Northwest. So this conflict is going to begin, interestingly, peacefully, in which the United States sent a commissioner by the name of John Slidell, who will later become famous for being taken off a British ship during the American Civil War when he was trying to usher in support from Britain for the Confederacy in the famous Trent Affair. And what's going to happen is Slidell is sent by Polk to Mexico City in order to try to peacefully purchase the Southwestern Territory in California for about $25 million. Mexico refuses, his offers to buy the land, and he's sent back to D.C., and the United States is going to have to figure out another way in order to try to gain the American West. And one of the things that happens is with the annexation of Texas, you now have disputes between the once Republic of Texas, which was part of Mexico, and the government of Mexico itself, in which there were border disputes and skirmishes between the Texas-Mexican border. And this was largely due to the fact that the Texans claimed all of the land to the Rio Grande River, which was 100 miles roughly south of what the Mexicans had claimed where Texas began, which was the Nueces River. And that land in between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River is now going to be disputed between the United States and the Mexican government. So Polk is going to use this border dispute and his powers as president to defend the southern border of Texas as a possible stepping stone for a larger conflict with Mexico to acquire the Southwest Territory. So he stationed a very intense general by the name of Old Rough and Ready Zachary Taylor, who will later be president of the United States, to Corpus Christi, Texas. And there, he was supposed to observe the Mexican army, analyze the situation, and be an army of observation. And he was stationed in between those two rivers, and it was there when some of his scouts were ambushed. And on April 25th, 1846, the Mexican-American War begun, and Polk proclaimed to Congress that American blood was shed on American soil. On May 13th, 1846, he gets congressional approval for a declaration of war against Mexico, in which 50,000 troops under General Winfield Scott are mobilized to defend the southern Texas border, as well as to expand into the southwestern area. So this war was opposed by the Whig Party. And the Whig Party was formed really on the basis of political economy. They wanted a strong federal government. They wanted a national bank, which Democrats had opposed, Jackson had destroyed. They wanted internal improvement, so that's using federal money to develop the West, as well as protective tariffs, which benefited manufacturers in New England, and which Southern critics said that did so at the expense of the South. And the Whigs say that this war was an unconstitutional executive abuse of power in which James K. Polk and Southern Democrats had orchestrated a land grab in the American Southwest to bring new slave states aligned with the pro-slavery faction of the Democratic Party that wanted to build out of these new states a majority that would control the federal government and relegate the free states and the abolitionist free soilers to a permanent political minority unable to control the mechanisms of the federal government. They criticized Polk for compromising with the British and not gaining all of the land that he said he would in the Pacific Northwest, because they believed that perhaps he was trying to stop the development of free states to enhance the power of the South. One of these critics was a new Whig congressman with dark hair, gray eyes, and ill-fitting clothes who introduced a spot resolution saying we need to know the exact spot where American blood had been shed on American soil. We need to know the conditions to investigate really how legitimate this war was for the United States and to investigate any wrongdoing on the part of James K. Polk. And this critic was none other than Abraham Lincoln, who was getting a start to his political career at the time. President Polk and factions of the Democratic Party dismissed these criticisms as grandstanding on part of the Whigs, that the geography and the desert conditions of the Southwest restricted naturally the institution of slavery in the American Southwest, and that this was really very much just a rhetorical issue that the Whigs were using to gain political popularity. But the Whigs fired back saying there are other forms of slavery, such as forced mining, that could be introduced into the region, and that the introduction of slavery into these western territories would prevent the settlement of free white Americans because they would not be able to economically compete with plantation or new forms of slavery in the American Southwest. You also had major opposition from John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, who was worried that these new territorial acquisitions would divide the country north and south, free and slave, even more than it had been, and would ultimately lead to the culmination of an American Civil War. Someone who was very much able to prophesize the coming of that major conflict. With the onset of war in California, you actually had American settlers under the leadership of a captain called John C. Fremont overthrow the Mexican government there and create the Independent Republic of California, otherwise known as the Bear Flag Republic, due to the bear flag that they had, which was actually created by Abraham Lincoln's nephew. Missouri volunteers also raised a regiment of regulars who marched over the Santa Fe Trail to seize the capital of New Mexico. Commanded by Stephen Watts Kearny, these tough dragoons occupied Santa Fe on August 18, 1846, without firing a single shot. They later pushed across the desert to seize California with 100 men who joined a few hundred sailors and Marines and volunteers to subdue Mexican resistance in the area by January 1847. In the interior of Mexico, and particularly northern Mexico, you had Zachary Taylor, who won a series of stunning victories over the Mexican army when he was often outnumbered 3-1, and he won these battles largely due to his mobile artillery and cavalry that was able to overwhelm the Mexican army. Despite Taylor's victories in northern Mexico, you still had the government of Mexico refuse to surrender. And you're going to have an amphibious invasion under General Fuss and Feathers Winfield Scott at Veracruz in southern Mexico, in which they landed thousands of troops at Veracruz, and they conquered the road in between Veracruz and the capital at Mexico City. And this is really rough terrain with lava fields, and the road rises from sea level at the shore all the way to 7,000 feet, and they conquered the entire way to Mexico City. And this is interestingly a time in which you have people like Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Gordon Meade, Braxton Bragg, all fighting on the same side with much affection for each other, before they rip each other apart in the American Civil War. So with Zachary Taylor holding the north of Mexico, and General Winfield Scott holding the south of Mexico and the capital at Mexico City, you really have the United States conquering just about all of Mexico. And this started the debate, what should happen next? Should the United States annex all of Mexico? Should it give it all back? Should it take some and give some back? What should happen to this territory? The Whigs, who had opposed the war, wanted to keep absolutely none of the territory, whereas the Democrats, who were in favor of it, wanted to keep all of Mexico. So they decided that they were going to have a compromise, in which we got the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And in this treaty, the Rio Grande becomes the border of the United States and Mexico. Mexico is given $15 million for the Southwest Territory. It's in California. Texas and Mexican disputes, financial disputes were settled. And all in all, in this war, about 13,000 American lives were lost, but the vast majority of those lives were due to disease, about 90% due to poor sanitation and poor supplies. So for that cost, you got the American Southwest. So in this episode, we looked at the causes as well as a broad overview of the Mexican-American War. In our next episode, we'll look at the immediate political aftermath. So things like the Wilmot Proviso, the Compromise of 1850, and really the ramping up of sectional tensions between North and South, as well as further and further debates over the topic of slavery and slavery extension into the territories, where things really start to heat up and get bloody. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for sticking to the end. You rock if you have made it this far. Let me know what you thought of this episode and this new format. Did you like it? Did you not like it? And thank you very much for listening.